Our primary mission here at Alternate Media is to bridge the gap between Judaism and Christianity as it's existed for far too long. Yeshua, as we know, never intended to start a new religion. He was a religious Jew.
I think at a certain point in every believer's life where we think, isn't there more?
There has definitely been a need within the church. That's something that a lot of Christians are searching for. A lot of Christians know that there is something missing in their faith. What indeed is intended to fill that is Judaic roots of the faith.
The New Testament is very clear about bridging the gap between Jew and Gentile, and we're just returning that mission back to the modern day.
Shalom, welcome, and Chag Samich. Chag Sameach to everyone. It is Hanukkah, where I am in time right now. And that is going to be the topic of discussion for tonight is the roots of Hanukkah. Are they pagan? This is something that I've noticed cycles around this time of year, very similar and kind of adjacent to the Christmas discussion, although this one only more recently. So without further ado, let me bring up my co-host for the night. How are you doing tonight, brother?
Fantastic. How are you?
Doing awesome. I'm very happy to be finally at this holiday.
Yeah, I am too. Of course, I got mine. I'm all the way on the total West Coast, so it's still only day 3 for me. It's not for another 3 or 4 hours before I light the 4th candle, but yeah, easily one of my favorite end of the season holidays.
Yep, mine is not behind me because I got it downstairs in the window. Where
it should be.
Yeah, putting it out there for the world to see.
Yeah. Again, it's still daylight for me. So, but yeah. So anyway, we've got basically a surprising answer for the subject of today's video. The short answer is yes, but to find out why, you have to stick around. So let's go into our traditions first, and then we'll jump into it.
Absolutely. Who is with you in spirit tonight?
Well, it's a proper Jewish holiday, so I got to have a proper Jewish bourbon here. I got I.W. Harper, the Cabernet Sauvignon aged straight bourbon whiskey. Yeah,
that is a good one. That is one of my favorites. It's dangerous.
Oh yes. I know you know me. I'm not really a bourbon guy, but recently I found a few bourbons that I really like, and this is one of them.
Yep. Tonight I am trying one that my father brought up from Georgia. They've had to go. My parents have had to spend some time in Georgia here recently, and they brought up from my favorite city in America, Savannah.
Savannah.
This is a 5-year aged single barrel bourbon, and it's incredible. It's fruity for a bourbon. It's very weird, the fruity notes that are in it, but it's delicious.
Yeah, I'd like to. I wish I lived close enough to try it, but. Alas, I'll stick with my I.W. Harper all the way out here in the West Coast.
Hey, at least you can still get it, right?
That's true for now.
So, tonight's topic, right? And I did a video addressing some of the concerns that get raised often, usually by the Hebrew roots community. But now also with the Christmas and whether or not that's pagan discussion in full swing, a lot of people like to throw back at the Torah observant community that, well, Hanukkah also has pagan roots, and they try and draw on some of the supposed similarities and pagan origins of Hanukkah. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But
yeah.
This tonight's topic, again, the answer is yes, and you have to watch further to understand why the answer is yes. But what do you have first on the agenda in that regard?
Well, so first, It's our Hanukkah special. So I've got a couple of gifts I'd like to give away. Really just two of the same gift, but I have a couple of extra copies here of The Letter Writer, easily one of my favorite books of all time by Tim Hegg. I bought these a while ago because they were on sale, so I purchased a couple of them just so I could have them to give away, and I unpacked them and was like, okay, here they are, time to give them away. So what better time than now? So here's the challenge. We only have two. So we want to give me and you talked a little bit. We're going to give them away to two people who have any two of the best questions that we receive in the chat. We're here to answer any of your questions that you might have. And so starting now, you can ask a question in the chat. We will try to answer as many questions as we can for every one of them. But me and Brad are going to pick two of our favorite, one each of our favorite good questions, really, really good questions. And if we pick yours, we're going to send you a book for it as a little Hanukkah gift. And thank you for engaging with us in an intellectual way. So that's the first thing that we have on the agenda is we are doing a giveaway. And then, of course, I
do think this is worth announcing, right?
Yes,
rather than just putting in
in
the comment banner is that, yes. So we are having a sale right now for the holiday for memberships on the Alternate Media website so that you can view a lot of the exclusive content that's up there. There's actually a lot of new exclusive content up there, especially if you've been following the Deck the Halls with Dogmatism series that we've been doing recently. There is an article for each part to that goes more in depth into the information that we go over. And those are all exclusive. You will be able to read those and access those. The passcode or the discount
code,
right? The discount code is Lights23.
Yep, and it will give you a 30% discount on all annual memberships. So not the monthly ones, but if you pay for an annual yearly membership, Lights23 will give you 30% off of the annual memberships. And yeah, there's plenty of like the Deck the Halls of Dogmatism for sure. Brad, you've been spearheading most of those articles, and they're very heavily sourced. They're incredibly well written. I went through them just to make sure like everything was basically in order, but it was good, and it was like, yep, run it, publish it. It's great, and it's a great addition to the Deck the Halls of Dogmatism series that we're doing here on the show, because the article does a better job, I think, at lining out some of the stuff. It's the same stuff that we went over in the show, but with all the sources listed there as well. So, it's a quick and easy read. I think they each take like 10 minutes to read at most, or something like that.
Not long.
So it's also faster to go through it than with our show, but I'm super. Those articles are great. So I can't wait till we get part 3 posted, and then of course part 4.
Part 4, I think, is probably going to be my favorite one because that's where we're going to go over the actual evidence that would lead to the conclusion that Christmas does in fact have pagan origin.
Yeah. So, all right. I think that's all the announcements out of the way, more or less. We have more towards the end of the video, of course, about the Patreon and the Discord and all that stuff, but we're 8 minutes into the show. Let's go ahead and jump into this Hanukkah holiday hoaxy pokesy stuff that we've got going on for all these different accusations. Would you like to kick us off?
Absolutely. Probably one of the first ones that jumps out at me immediately. And this I've heard from both the anti-Hanukkah Hebrew roots side and then like the pro-Christmas, it's okay to adopt pagan customs, which is essentially the argument that's being made is like, look, even if Christmas is pagan, so is Hanukkah. So like, it's okay. You guys are kind of picking and choosing with which additions and which man-made holidays you're okay with and you're not okay with. And one of the commonalities that's pointed out is that Hanukkah begins on what date, Seamus?
The Kislev 25, the 25th of the month of Kislev, which is round about the same time as where December falls in. Yeah, on the Hebrew
Right.
calendar.
It's trying to draw this distinction or this correlation between December 25th and Kislev 25th, and without going into the problems of that being incorrect, because it's very rare that Hanukkah and Christmas actually will line up with one another. Matter of fact, Hanukkah is more likely to end up sometime in November than it is, during the Christmas season. But usually it will be early December. However, Thanksgiving, which we were discussing earlier, Thanksgiving is a very rare phenomenon, right? It won't happen again until like 2070 or something like that. So that is a rare phenomenon. But without going too much into all of the problems with trying to draw a correlation between the Hebrew calendar and the either Julian or Gregorian calendar, you have to concede that Christmas is pagan in order for that to work, right? You have to concede that December 25th is pagan if you're going to say, well, so is Hanukkah because, Kislev 25, right? That's a concession that you have to make.
Yeah, which you kind of shoot yourself in the foot there. Then it's, to make your argument, you have to destroy your own position.
And granted, that is only for the pro-Christmas side. For the Hebrew root side that despises anything that's not specifically outlined in the written Torah, that's kind of a consistent argument.
Yeah, fair enough. But I guess, first and foremost, a quick overview of what Hanukkah is exactly. Maybe not everyone is super familiar. They know about, maybe the Hanukkah like is behind me or something, but they don't really fully know or understand the story, because we tend to put a lot of focus on the lights, the miracle of the lights, but we actually put almost no focus on the actual miracle that is the Hanukkah miracle.
Yes.
And so this is just a short, like really abridged version of the story, because we have a lot more stuff to go over, but you can find this in the book of Maccabees, the Deuterocanonical Apocrypha. Doesn't make its way into the Tanakh, does make its way into the Septuagint, but it was because it's a Greek document and it wasn't included in the Tanakh because it was not a Hebrew document. It was a Greek document. So, and it is a historical account of the Hasmoneans, the Hashmonean dynasty, sort of rededicating the temple from the Seleucid Empire of the Greeks. At the time, we have Antiochus Epiphanes. He outlaws basically Judaism as a religion, outlaws all of its practices, outlaws circumcision, and also there's a lot of gruesome details around that, but also orders that a pig be offered in the temple in honor of, I believe it's to Zeus. I could be wrong, but I believe he orders that. Now, there's kind of an internal schism within Judaism at this time. They're in what's called essentially the diaspora, or the dispersion. And after the conquering of Alexander the Great and turning the whole world more or less Greek, a lot of Jews were Hellenized, and Hellenized is just a way of saying Greekified, from the Greek word halos, which
secularized.
Right. So they begin to take on Greek practice. They kind of, start conforming to the majority of the rest of the world, and, walking back a little bit on their Jewish identity, mostly, at least not fully, but mostly in the areas in which it is in direct conflict to more Greek majority regular practice. You can think of this as like the same sort of thing with secular Christians, where you have Christians that are more like, they don't look very Christian in the world. They're very much about kind of blending in and not standing too far out as Christians. So that there's a kind of internal civil war going on within Judaism at the time. Not a very violent one, but about inclusion and Hellenization. So this was a step too far, however. But unfortunately, there was a Jew who volunteered to get up and offer the pig to Zeus at the temple, in which case one of the first Maccabean revolutionists kills the man, and thus kicking off the revolution against the Seleucid Empire, and starting essentially a Jewish revolt. They are heavily outnumbered. They get called the Maccabees because the hammer. It's actually part of their tactic. It's a very guerrilla warfare style tactic that they use. But against all odds, they end up kicking the Greeks out of Jerusalem and freeing themselves from the Seleucid Empire's reigns, more or less, the handcuffs. And they go back into the temple for the first time in a long time. And they find that the Greeks have desecrated everything there is in the temple. Nothing can be reused that's been desecrated for paganism, except for one vial of oil that was left over. It still had the high priest's seal on it, which means it was undefiled. And it was only 1 day's supply worth of oil for the menorah itself. But they decided to, instead of waiting the 8 days that it takes to make another batch of oil, they'd go ahead and rededicate the temple immediately, because this is a long awaited thing. And then the miracle of the lights happened. The 1 day's worth of oil lasts the full 8 days, while they work and toil to get the rest of the oil supply. And then that's kind of the miracle. And the temple is completely rededicated. They clean it back out. And the offering system, the temple system, gets put back into place, essentially. Unfortunately, it's a short-lived victory, but the miracle is important to the story, because I would say the main takeaway from the story is that if this were to happen today with us, right? Our military does this all the time. We go in heavily outnumbered with like a team of Navy SEALs or something, and then they come out victorious against, full regiments. We have people who we give a Medal of Honor to as a result of holding back entire, battalions and armies of the enemy. And we often don't really consider them miracles, even though they ought to be. But we tend to think of that as just, we're great. And we are definitely, we Americans produce really good, strong, corn-fed country boys that can fight and against all odds. And that's actually what the Maccabeans were afraid of. They were afraid that they felt like they had done this on their own with their own special forces kind of thing. And the 8 days of light was proof positive for them that it was in fact God's hand over the victory and not just their own doing. And they were worried about that because of course, the dark periods that were happening at the time, for sure. But so that's kind of an overview. That's a quick down and dirty, like abridged version of the Hanukkah story. It's a military victory. And we tend to focus on the light because the light of the world, the temple's rededication. So you hear it called by different names: the Festival of Dedication, Festival of Lights, things like that. But that's essentially the gist of what we're talking about.
Yep. A few things that I think are relevant to point out about that story too, because one of people's favorite topics, especially, in the Torah observant community, is eschatology, right? Mm. And everybody has a big concern over what's going to happen in the end times. And really, this story plays a huge role in knowing exactly what to look for, because when Yeshua mentions the abomination that causes desolation, right, this is actually what he's talking about. There's a lot of dispute and debate in the world of Christianity over what the abomination that causes desolation is. It's a big mystery. But this is what it is, and it's referenced by Daniel. And in high school, I took on an independent project, right? I figured, okay, well, if we go by the beasts, right? You have the goat that has the one horn that is supplanted by the four horns that has the one conspicuous horn that grows out of one of them, right? So if that's the case, right? If it's Alexander the Great who was replaced by his four generals, then I should be able to trace the lineage of Antiochus Epiphanes back to one of those four generals. So I undertook the task of doing that, and it's true. You can directly trace his lineage back to one of those four generals, and it's only a matter of like 4 or 5 generations. Actually, this is not that far removed, and so that, like, I think it's pretty conclusive proof that this actually is what Yeshua is referring to. The desecration of the temple being the abomination that causes desolation. So when we see people talking about this building of a third temple as though the fact that the temple itself existing is the abomination that causes desolation, that is completely backward from what we know the biblical narrative tells us. The reality is that the abomination that causes desolation can't happen if there isn't a temple, or at the very least an altar. There would have to at least be an altar. So we shouldn't be offended by or worried about there being a new temple and a new altar. These are things that have to be in place in order for the abomination that causes desolation to happen.
Yeah, and it's happened on a number of occasions, right? Obviously, it happened during Antiochus Epiphanes. It happens basically again after the Second Jewish Revolt, when the Jews are kicked out of Jerusalem permanently. There was one question in the comments I wanted to hit up real quick. What year did the Hanukkah come into existence, and why? The Hanukkah miracle itself takes place in about 167
I think
BC.
that says Hanukkah.
Oh, the Hanukkah. Is that what it says?
Yeah, Hanukkah.
Oh, it does say Hanukkah. Okay. We actually have a.
We're going to touch on that.
Now's the time to bring this up. Here we go. Here, what we have is a dug up artifact of an oil lamp dating probably around from the 1st century, whether it's BC or AD. It's really kind of hard to tell with these things because they're made out of clay. But this was dug up in Jerusalem, in and around Jerusalem, and it is a Hanukkah. It has 8 wick holes. It's an oil lamp, so you fill it with oil and then light them. And so when it comes to Hanukkahs, particularly, we actually have a lot of evidence to even place Hanukkahs around the same time that Jesus was alive. And so at the very least, he was aware of them. And then on top of that, we have conversations in the Mishnah and in the Gemara about the different ways to light the candles and the wicks on Hanukkah, coming from Hillel and Shammai, which were 1st century BC and AD figures. And even the Mishnah goes so far as to, there's a commentator in the Mishnah goes so far as to say that there's little said about Hanukkah in the Mishnah specifically. A lot of it comes from the Gemara, because the Mishnah thought that the knowledge was so commonplace that they really needed to comment on it. So they just kind of get it mentioned in passing. And then the Gemara comes in and specifies, because that's what the Gemara likes to do. The Gemara likes to come in, take what the Mishnah said and go, okay, it wasn't specific enough. Here you go. My bad. And then kind of give you the details. But yeah, we actually have a lot like, when exactly did this start happening? Did it start in the year 167 BC? That it's kind of speculation at that point, but what we do have here are some 1st century artifacts. So I would say within about a 40 to 60 year time frame, we start seeing, because within 40 to 60 years, that's when we have figures in recorded history celebrating Hanukkah as the festival of dedication. So, yeah.
Absolutely. There was another question up here I thought was worth addressing, because this is something that often comes up too, right? Is evidence that the miracle of the Maccabees happened, because there's no primary sources on that. What do you got on that, Seamus?
So, interestingly, I don't have a lot on that. What we know is we don't have a lot of primary sources on a lot of things when it comes to...
We don't have a primary source on the book of Maccabees because, from what we can tell, it's very similar to the New Testament writings in that it was copied from a Hebrew original, and that Hebrew original no longer exists.
Yeah, so that's kind of like I says, it does make its way into the Septuagint. But it's weird what you consider and don't consider to be a primary source. For example, Josephus is a source on Hanukkah and its practices. He writes in Antiquities, in his book Antiquities, of the Hanukkah practice, and he gives a pretty more or less detailed paragraph on what, explaining a little bit of the holiday and its practice, in which we do find a recording of the 8-day miracle as well. So, and the lighting of the candles in either in ascending or descending order. I believe he he, of course, Hillel was the ruling figure after Shammai dies, and so Hillel's rulings become law, and so ascending would have been
You mean the other way around?
ascending order.
You said the reverse order. Shammai became the ruling authority when Hillel died.
No. When Shammai died, Hillel.
You mean that his halakha? Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah. I can see why you would confuse that, but yeah, different. Shammai dies, and then basically they go, okay, that was bad.
That's Hillel's way.
What Hillel said is going to be law. And so, yeah, but so we actually have a lot of sources. Now, we might not have any primary sources to say that the 8-day miracle happened in the temple, but it's also, keep in mind, you're playing a dangerous game when you say that you need to have a primary source from like an eyewitness account of this miracle to happen. Because then you hold yourself to a standard that you wouldn't be able to hold many other biblical facts that we hold to as more or less historical fact to that same standard.
Or really many other historical figures, even outside of the Bible. Remember, we did a debate once where we were debating two mythicists who were having a really hard time validating primary sources for the existence of Alexander the Great. Because we don't have any contemporary sources from that time. We have historians who are citing other historians whose writings don't exist. Right, so we don't have any primary sources to confirm the existence of Alexander the Great. We have historians who are citing other historians from generations later.
And sometimes what ends up happening is we have historians citing another historian who was a primary source, but their work no longer exists, such as is the case with Papias. Eusebius records what Papias said, but unfortunately, Eusebius had a copy of Papias's work, but we don't. And then, but by that same token as well, you know, something to consider, the details of events happening during the trial of Jesus. We have no primary sources of how that actually went down. So if you take at face value anything written in the Gospels on the trial of Jesus, and you hold that to the same standard in which you're going to hold Hanukkah, what you actually have now is you have to get rid of the narrative of what was happening during his trial. Because you're never going to have a primary source for that. You're only going to have the gospel accounts, and nobody who wrote a gospel was there to see it. They all heard it from somebody else who heard it from somebody else, and they wrote it in their gospels. And that's not a primary source. That is technically a secondary source. So we have sources that would be secondary, tertiary sources about the Hanukkah story, but you know, many of the people that took place in the Hanukkah miracle died shortly thereafter in the continuing war against the Greeks. So, yeah, it's not to say you can't believe it, obviously. In fact, it seems to be more or less taken for granted that it was something that was just believed by the Jewish people that it did in fact happen. And so, you know, take that for what it is. But that's the best we can do when it comes to primary sources. On a lot of ancient history, like you just brought up Alexander the Great, that's usually the case with a lot of historical figures. We actually have not a single original copy of Shakespearean works exist. Not one. They're all copies. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I follow an American historian. Like he specifically does like American history, particularly American history of like the turn of the century, World War I, World War II. But he actually points out, you know, when it comes to historical documentation, there is a certain point in history where we really have to just trust that these people are telling the truth. And the example that he uses to point that out is Herodotus, right? The first historian. We're really just trusting that he is telling us the truth about what was happening in his own time. And the reason he points that out is because Herodotus also wrote a lot about Atlantis. So either Atlantis existed because we're trusting that he was telling us the truth about his time, or Atlantis was a work of fiction that he also intermingled with his records of history that we trust are accurate. There's a certain point in history where you really are just trusting that the people who recorded it are being truthful. And I thought that was actually is a really good example. to use, because I mean that's what we're talking about when it comes to this.
Yeah, for that particular question, for sure. And then we'll hit this question real quick, and then move on to the next bullet point that we have planned. When was the Shemesh added? Right from the beginning. You need a primary lighting source to light the other 8 candles. Now, when it gets added in the setup, like you see here, where it starts to become part of the setup, that's more or less unknown. Because by the time we hear a more detailed explanation of how Hanukkah is practiced, we're now into medieval period, the 8th century. And so, and again, they took it for granted. They just accepted that this was always a thing. But yeah, you need at least one candle to start lighting the other 8 on those, the ancient Hanukkah that I showed you. So technically it's always been a thing. It's just whether or not it was featured is a point for debate. It was likely pretty early on because, Hanukkahs look like menorahs for a reason, because it is a memory of the rededication of the temple. So having a middle lamp was sort of natural in its origin, I think.
I think it's also worth pointing out, because some people, again, they take issue with the fact that it is not the same as the menorah that's in the temple. And that's okay. You're not supposed to have that menorah in your home because it belongs in the temple, right? So I get that there's a lot of people out there who have a very traditional menorah in their home, and they think that that's more correct than having a 9-stem Hanukkah in your home. It's actually not. That menorah belongs in the temple. It doesn't belong in your personal home.
Yeah, recreations. I think drawings are fine. Artwork is fine, but a physical recreation of the menorah is, you're taking the holiness out of it and you put it in your home. It's an item dedicated specifically for the temple. So this is fine because it's obviously not, but it's close. But it's meant to be that way. It's meant to be close, but no cigar. So point number 2. This is where we get into the fun part. Does Hanukkah have pagan origins? Yes, it does.
Yes, it does.
Of course it does. Absolutely. It wouldn't exist if there wasn't pagan origins. That's kind of the whole point, in fact.
Yep. Hanukkah exists because it is the direct contrast to paganism. It exists as a revolt and a rebellion against paganism. It exists as a big screw you to the oppression of paganism.
As my favorite angry Jew likes to say all the time, his name is Ben Shapiro, by the way, a giant pulsating middle finger to paganism is what this celebration is. And in fact, the middle lamp is higher.
Absolutely.
Middle finger, if you will. But part of the story of the Hanukkah that we sort of, I guess, brushed over is it happens in the wintertime. And there's a reason for that. The Saturnalia and Mithras cults, I think it's mostly Saturnalia, though, because it's the Greek Seleucid Empire. During their pagan solstice celebrations, Jews were the targets of ridicule and embarrassment.
Yep.
Oppression.
Yep.
That's what starts the revolution sort of to begin with. They, during the holiday season, they like to pick on Jews. And so,
which, by the way, is a tradition that continued with Christmas right on into the 19th century.
Yes. And one can, in fact, many Jews tend to identify, and if you read the history, again, if you make that connection between Saturnalia or Mithras with Christmas, which many scholars for a long time did, those things predate the Christian Christmas celebration. So it'd be around about this time when the Saturnalia holidays are kind of kicking into full swing, and the Jews are being specifically targeted and oppressed as, playthings as a result of the pagan holidays. Many Jews historically have seen Hanukkah as a victory over Christmas before it was called Christmas, but it's still, they look around them and it's still all the same stuff. Everything looks like it did 2,200 years ago nearly. And so nothing has changed, nothing is new under the sun. And so they very much identify with this symbolism as a victory over and above the Christmas celebrations, whatever identity they might happen to take, whether it's Christmas because it's Christian now, but Saturnalia, Mithricism at the time, the Seleucid Empire, the Greeks celebrating their solstice holidays, their Advents. That's part of the, Hanukkah doesn't exist unless there's pagan oppression against Jews. So it absolutely does have pagan origins. That's kind of the point. In fact, that's why it always happens right around the same time as pagan holidays happen. It's because that's when the event happened, when the victory over paganism happened.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, again, if we're going to tie Hanukkah to any form of paganism on its, being Kislev 25 and correlating that with December 25th, again, remember, one of the bigger arguments against Christmas being pagan is that there was no pagan holiday on December 25th prior to the advent of either Christmas or Sol Invictus. There's a huge debate over that. I just wrote an article on that. But that's actually not true. Again, you already have to concede that there must have been some kind of a holiday on December 25th if you're going to argue that Kislev 25 directly correlates to December 25th in terms of pagan origin. And this is something that we will be touching on next week in the fourth installment of Deck the Halls of Dogmatism. But it is worth pointing out, and I'll just point it out very briefly, that the Mishnah actually forbids Jews from doing business with pagans both 3 days prior and 3 days following their holidays. The reason being because pagans were still celebrating their holidays 3 days prior and 3 days after. So even if Saturnalia ended on December 23rd, which is the big argument that a lot of people make, because, well, Saturnalia ends this December 23rd, so that's not the 25th, so you can't make that argument. Well, the Mishnah says that a Jew still wouldn't be allowed to be doing business with a pagan on December 25th because that pagan would still be celebrating Saturnalia.
Yeah, until December 26th. And then it's like, all right, now you can start doing business again. Day
Right.
after day. Weird, huh? Not a smoking gun, but really sus. Really sus. I'm seeing a couple of questions up here too. In fact, that you've put a star on. Let's see if we want to hit. If a physical recreation is wrong for the menorah, why do those who are not of the line of Aaron recite the Aaronic blessing? Isn't that only for Aaron's line to speak over the people? Yes and no. At the official capacity, yes. And in fact, if you go to a synagogue, when they do the Aaronic blessing, the only ones that are saying it are those who are confirmed of the line of Aaron. And even then, you go to the synagogue, the cantor breaks up when he says it with some singing in between with some of the words. And he's only saying it so that the sons of Aaron who are actually supposed to be saying it know how it's supposed to sound right before they say it over the people. So he's really just kind of cueing them like a music director. And that's really it. And then everyone else, you put your talit all the way over your head, so you can't see. You're not supposed to see anything. You just listen. You hear. You reflect in your own little bubble. So the answer kind of has a couple of I guess nuances there. But at the official capacity, it is for Aaron. But that blessing also appears on many necklaces in the ancient world. In fact, the oldest inscription of Hebrew that we have is the Aaronic blessing. And it was a necklace pendant. So there's some universality for it, but at the official capacity, it's for Aaron. Sure.
I would also say that a blessing is not the same as a direct physical recreation of a physical object. There's some nuance there, and that's worth pointing out.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's see here. There's another question here. Have you heard any midrash about Antiochus occupying the place for approximately 8 years during 168 to 160? That's during the time of the Maccabean story. I'm not aware of any midrash particularly, unless you are, Brad. I'm not.
I am not. No.
I can look into that though. I'm just not aware. Just to answer that question real quick. So the next bullet point that we have, right? So does Hanukkah have pagan origins? Of course it does. That's kind of the point. Does Hanukkah adopt pagan practices? This is actually what separates Hanukkah from a pagan adaptation or a Christian adaptation of a pagan holiday. What we have in Christian history is a long history of syncretism. Hanukkah is specifically a giant pulsating middle finger to paganism. And so it makes it a point not to adopt any pagan practices, because to do so would be to violate the spirit of the Hanukkah victory outright.
Right.
So that being said, there's, the whole 8 days of lighting a candle. Is that pagan necessarily? I think if lighting a fire on a holiday is pagan, then we've got a problem in Judaism in general.
Well, and that's like that's the other problem. And we did an episode on this right around the Halloween season, right? Understanding the difference between and this is almost always where the Christmas argument will go with somebody who is pro Christmas. They tend to try and present a false dichotomy that there is sacred and secular, and like that's the divide. And so, anytime that you're doing something that is secular that everybody does, you're doing something that pagans do, and so you're guilty of doing it too, right? And that's the idea. Matter of fact, some people will point out, right, that wedding bands are pagan. The interesting thing is I always follow that up with, okay, what specific pagan deity and what aspect of worship of that deity are wedding bands tied to? I can never get an answer on that because honestly, nobody knows. Yeah. All they know is that it's something that was practiced by pagan cultures. They're not really sure to what degree of religiosity. So what I'm saying is the divide is not sacred and secular. That is a false dichotomy. All right. There is holy, there is mundane, and there is abomination, right?
Yeah.
Mundane is something that everybody does, and even if it's not something that everybody does, say that it is something that's unique to a particular culture that has a pagan cult. If there's no religiosity behind it, that's still mundane because it's only a cultural practice at that point.
Yeah. The 3 levels, right? You the holy, mundane, and then I've also heard it. The disgusting is one way a rabbi once put it, because the same can be applied to music. You have holy music, then you have mundane music that it's just music. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not holy music, but there's nothing wrong with it, and so it's permitted. And then you have disgusting music, right? Which is obvious, in the description. And that's, a good way of looking at it. There are some things that are just, there's nothing wrong with them, and they're practically universal. Okay. Candles are everywhere in every culture, and they are by and large mundane. Now there are some candles like Shabbos candles that are holy. And in a way, these are a type of holiness in the candles, because they do represent a special time, a miracle being performed by God. There's something there to it, but just to say that lighting a candle in ascending order from 0 to 8 over a period of 8 days is a pagan practice, maybe, but not particularly. We don't see other pagan holidays that have 8 days of ascending candle lighting like Hanukkah does. It's actually fairly unique. And trust me when I say, all week when preparing for this episode, I looked for some other religious pagan holiday that has anything close to a Hanukkah style celebration with candles being lit in ascending order for a period of 8 days. And, outside of course, we have a Kwanzaa, which is a brand new recent thing. Is not ancient in any way. There's nothing. And in fact, what I ended up finding was that there are even allegations that, if anything, the pagans got their solstice holiday ideas from Judaism. And then there is a midrash about how Adam was the first to celebrate solstice holidays. And then the pagans got the idea from Adam and made it all about their pagan stuff. But originally it was a Jewish holiday thing to do, was to celebrate as past the solstice when light would return to the earth. For those of you who don't know, that the Midrash is pretty quickly, it basically says Adam was sitting, in the garden, or actually not in the garden, on the earth. And he's mourning how, of course, he feels he's responsible for basically the destruction of the earth. And every day he notices that the days get shorter and shorter every single day. So he thinks to himself, that's it. I've destroyed the world. Eventually it's just going to be nothing but darkness and there's going to be no sunlight left. And so he mourns for a period of 8 days. And then after the solstice, the days start to get longer again. And he realizes, oh, this is natural. This is just the way nature works. And so he has a celebration for 8 days, celebrating the post, solstice, where he has that realization for the first time in his life that that's just what happens, and it's not his fault. That is just the way things are. And so the Midrash basically, it instead of appropriation, it's called religious expropriation. It's where basically Judaism says, no, you got the idea from us. We're just letting you have it. And that's a kind of expropriation.
Basically, the calculation theorist argument about Christmas.
Yeah. And real quick, Grafted Acres actually put this. This is in reference to the Aaronic blessing. Yes, you say it over your children because when you are at your table in your home on Shabbos, your table becomes the altar and you become the priest of your own home. And yes, that's why you say the Aaronic blessing over your children, because you are the priest over your home and your table is the altar. That's why bread has to be present with salt for the meal, because it is a meal offering. And that's why you say the blessings and everything. Your house becomes a tiny temple in a way. And that's why you put the Aaronic blessing. Even if you're not a son of Aaron, you are a nation of priests. So kind of, yeah, just to circle back to that real quick, because I did see that, and it's actually a super good question and a really good point. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yep. She also brought up regarding Hanukkah and the institution of Hanukkah. Yes, it actually did serve as a second chance at Sukkot, right? Because during the war campaign, they couldn't celebrate Sukkot. They were at war, So this was finally a time where they had, reconquered the temple grounds, liberated it from pagan influence, and could rededicate it and actually take part in a legitimate celebration for 8 days, right? Much like Sukkot. So yes, this would have been a second chance at Sukkot, which is, it's fascinating because even in the Torah we see Pesach Sheni, right? You get a second Passover, which is the first holiday of the calendar year that has a 7-day period and then an 8th day. And so Sukkot, being kind of the final holiday of the calendar year, doesn't have that secondary part, and that's because the relevancy of it hadn't occurred yet in history, but then it did, and so now we have Hanukkah, which is like a second Sukkot.
Yeah, in a lot of ways you could see it, and like Pesach Sheni, you don't observe 7 days of unleavened bread after the second Passover meal. It's not, you don't do the full holiday that second time. Sukkot, you have the first day, the 7th day, and the 8th day, Shmini Atzeret. And in Hanukkah, it's not a mandated Passover. You really only get a mandated Shabbat. You really only get one Shabbat per Hanukkah, and that's like a couple of days ago. And so you sort of get like the one chance, and then everything's kind of, but it's still it is like a second. It is like a Sukkot Sheni in a way, which I think is kind of cool. Now there is this question actually right here. I just wanted to address this real quick because we did do a full episode on this topic. You cover your head during prayer. Isn't that against the apostolic decree for believers in Yeshua? No, you're referring to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. We did an episode called Better Call Paul, and it's about head coverings. And no, that's one of those passages that are pretty terribly translated. That in like second or Philippians chapter 2 is another one of those passages, not translated really well at all. But 1 Corinthians 11 is not talking about head coverings like a hat. In fact, it's more likely and more translationally appropriate that for men, it's talking about having long hair,
Yes,
like long flowing hair.
it is.
It's based on the context.
Yeah, that entire chapter, right? That whole section is not about prayer life. It's about cross dressing. Right?
Yeah, cross-dressing and basically showing up to the synagogue inappropriately. You know, women should, if they're married, have their hair with, you know, a covering on it, and then men, and it says, it doesn't say head covered, it says with their head down. And it's likely in reference to having hair down, like long, like a woman's. Anyway, we got a whole episode on it. Go see that if you want more information on it. We spent a whole hour on that. Last couple of points here. So does Hanukkah adopt pagan practices? It doesn't. The 8-day thing, no. You know, again, it is happening around the solstice because the miracle itself happened around the solstice. So that's just, it's by proxy, but it's not by adoption or adaptation from a pagan origin. So it is victory over paganism. That's kind of
that's the point.
That's the point. And I had a piece of scripture here. So a lot of people talk about John chapter 10, 22, right? Where Yeshua is in the temple during the Feast of Dedication, which is Hanukkah. And right before this particular section in chapter 10, it's towards the end of chapter 9, he talks about being a light to the world. And again, it kind of fits the details of Hanukkah being the center of this narrative around John 10, and kind of squeezing in there that he's there also around the time of the Feast of Dedication. And he's been talking about being a light to the world this whole time. The parallels are, I think, unmistakable. And particularly, even though this is not in conjunction with the John 10, I think the message anyway is appropriate from Matthew 5. This is from, of course, the Sermon on the Mount. But 14, let's see here.
While you're looking for that, I go ahead if you found it.
I did. You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, but rather on a lampstand, and it gives light for all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, so that they may see your good works and give glory to God, your Father in heaven. That's actually the Hanukkah message for everybody. And so I wanted to throw that in there as like a gentle reminder that this Hanukkah theme is true to the lessons that our Master Yeshua taught on a daily basis. And so it's not inconsequential that John in chapter 10, verse 22 brings up that it is the festival of dedication. The other gospels don't. They don't really feel the need to, but John feels the need to at least mention it because it is important at least to have some sort of reminder that there is an overarching context to some of his lessons that are happening right around this time. And so the message isn't lost on the people when they hear these teachings, these words. This is not unlike, a pastor teaching a Christmas lesson around and about near Christmas. It's like, it's common. You expect it, it's going to happen. You catch the parallels right away. The same thing is happening in the Gospels here. And that's why John brings it up in his chapter 10. And so there's a lot, just to say that basically there's a lot there.
One thing I want to go back to very quickly, right? Okay. Victory over paganism, because this is still a direct contrast. Again, the Hanukkah contrasts against paganism, it not borrowing from it. We've established that here, but just another aspect in which this is true when it comes to the differences between Hanukkah and Christmas, right? Because that's the other accusation, is that Hanukkah is just the Jewish Christmas. What we've just explained and what we can observe in history is that Hanukkah does not borrow from pagan practice. On the contrary, it establishes a tradition in the face of pagan practice. That is true victory over paganism. When we hear many people try and justify their position on Christmas, And the fact that Christmas does involve certain traditions, which are questionable at the very least, if not inherently rooted in paganism, the response is often, well, that's victory over paganism. We took that practice and we redeemed it, we rededicated it, and now we that same thing that they were doing then, but we do it for Jesus now. That is not victory over paganism, right? I would dare say that that's succumbing to paganism. Victory over paganism is Hanukkah, where you're doing the opposite of the pagan thing. You establish your own tradition rather than borrowing from their tradition.
Yeah, you take whatever tradition is there and you completely eradicate its memory and replace it with something better. So if you're going to replace it, that's totally fine with that. But to synchronize with it, which the Catholic Church has a history of doing, that's not victory. If anything, you're giving exactly what the adversary wants. He'll take any worship. He'll take any worship of any form, even if it's inadvertent. We golden calfed it. That's a great comment. That's a top comment right there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's a couple of other questions in here. This is actually a pretty good one. What are your thoughts on family time on the days other than Christmas this time of year? Should we be worried about it, like sitting at our family's tables on the 27th of December or something like that, or look at it more Pauline? Have at it.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation because this is typically, a pretty divided subject when it comes to the abandoning of Christmas, right? Do we maintain family time or do we don't? I try and boil it down to what is the celebration, right? If people are inviting you over to a general holiday season get together, right? That's not going to have a specific theme of any kind. And it's not being done for any particular holiday, but in the spirit of the season, sure, fine. But whenever it comes to, family or friend get-togethers and they invite us for some kind of a get-together like this, knowing they already know our position that we don't engage, in the celebration of Christmas, my question is always, okay, is this a Christmas celebration? Like, are you getting together? Are you gathering for the purpose of celebrating Christmas? Because that ultimately is going to determine whether or not I show up.
That's kind of where I am too. But especially if it's after the day, particularly, I usually don't have an issue.
Right.
Because it's like, well, it's, it's just another day for you and me at this point. So, you can try and shoehorn Christmas into this all you want, but we both know you can't. And so it kind of just depends. But by and large, you shouldn't have any problems with connecting with family.
I will say, for those who have kids, the thing really to consider is, if there's going to be presents exchanged, right? If all of the regular Christmas celebration traditions are going to be met at this event, and your children are going to be the ones excluded because you don't, or better yet, if your children are not going to be excluded because your family doesn't respect your beliefs, right? And that's another whole conversation. These really are things to consider. Now, if your family is nice enough to try and hold the get together somewhere in between, and they acknowledge that these gifts are in fact Hanukkah gifts and not Christmas gifts, I get that seems like a
and they don't cook a Christmas ham.
But again, intention really is what matters here.
Yeah, this practice can get pretty lonely pretty quickly, honestly, because not many families are willing to compensate for a kosher diet. It's one of those like, oh, you're gluten free, we'll move heaven and earth for you. You keep kosher? What are you, a heathen? How dare you? Like, it's a very different attitude when it comes to biblical practice. And so things can get really heated really quickly just in that regard. Sometimes it's just better to go in and be like, yeah, I'm vegan, deal with it. Stop, don't serve me any meat of any kind, because sometimes they might be more receptive to that, funny enough. But Yeah, it depends on the attitude, right? And the feel of everything. Like you were saying, it completely depends. Like if families are more than welcome to be accommodating, and still welcoming, then that's a very different. Like my family is that way, thank God. But other families are not, and it's a lot more hostile. In which case, it might be better to distance yourself during this time of year to create a more clear separation. Where some families don't need to have that distance because the clear separation has already been made, and they respect it, and so it's not a problem at all. It varies between families, people, situations. It's hard to answer that question with any kind of solidity.
This ultimately is something that you're going to have to pray about and navigate on your own. Ultimately,
Yeah.
we can
Consult a
share
rabbi.
our experience and how we have navigated that. But outside of that, you'll have to. Every family is unique. Every family dynamic is unique, right? And you're going to have to navigate that on your own. And would definitely recommend praying about it.
Yes. I have at one point, why should you care? I feel like we kind of hit that head on the. I mean, some people have commented. I'll just hit it up real quick. If you do the math, it's very likely that Yeshua's conception would have happened around about the time of Hanukkah, which lines up really quite nicely with everything else, all things considered.
Yes. So it not only, the idea of the light of the world literally entering the world, at
During
Hanukkah.
the Festival of Lights.
This is a comment worth pointing out, because science has actually proven now that at the exact moment of conception, at the exact moment where sperm meets ovum, there is in fact a spark of light, right? A spark of energy. Light is energy, and it is like there are even there's at least one video that I've seen of what that moment looks like, and it is in fact a spark of light. So yeah, quite literally, the light of the world entered the world, right? Became an existing being, physically. The fact that would happen during Hanukkah not only theologically works, but again, mathematically works based on what we can determine from the scriptural narrative about his birth.
Yeah, and there's so many other things that are already pre-existing within Judaism that lines up perfectly with this. Women bring light into the world, right? So there's a few other nice parallels that work out. But why, at the end of the day, why should you care? Your religion depends on it. The defeat of paganism is the ultimate redemption promise, is to wipe the rest of the world away in such a way that we have the new heaven, the new earth, the new Jerusalem, the Messiah's second coming, and the 1,000 years of peace. That is the story of Hanukkah at its extreme, taken to the extreme. That's what that is. And in fact, you think of it, the new heaven, new earth, new Jerusalem, the heavenly temple, it is a rededication in a way. And so, yeah, there's a lot of parallels, especially as a Christian who lives with the hope of the resurrection one day, believing in Yeshua's resurrection. Hanukkah couldn't, nothing should replace Hanukkah. If anything, we should start phasing Christmas out in favor of this superior holiday.
Yes. Yeah. I don't understand how that is lost on Christianity, but without Hanukkah, there's no Jesus. Right.
That's true.
I don't understand how that gets lost, or how that's never considered. But without Hanukkah, there is no Jesus. So without Hanukkah, there's arguably, from their purview, without Hanukkah, there's no Christmas.
If that's a convoluted way of saying that, but yeah. So we've picked out a few comments here, questions. I think it's about time we picked our two favorites. Have you picked one out?
I am currently looking through them, but there's one that did catch my personal attention for reasons. We didn't answer this one, but Rachel is fantastic, and I love being a dad, and it's amazing. So
I I think my favorite one is actually this marriage for life comment about the physical recreation wrong from the menorah. Then why are those? Or cite the line of the Aaronic blessing. This is like, it's not that it's a difficult question. I just love that this person is obviously using, like, they're engaged in such a way, or they're trying to make these different connections. I like the comment for that. It's like, well, wait a minute. If that's true for the menorah, why is it different here in a different situation? It's a very like Talmudic thing to do, is to like take something that's similar enough but completely different in topic and try to apply the same logic to it. And so this led into a few different things that we talked about. It came up twice tonight in the show. So for me, this is a winning comment. So Marriage for Life, send us an email at alternatemedia@gmail.com. It's ALTAR media, alternate, ALTARNATE media at gmail.com, and send us your mailing information and we'll send a book. Are you picking that other one for the other book?
I'm biased, yes.
Okay, so
hold on, Grafted Acres, if you already have this book, then you can give it to somebody else.
that is also true. Yeah, if you already have this book, you can absolutely give it away to somebody else.
Regifting. I do think, just because it is important for community outreach, right, is that there is a request for prayer for healing. So everybody, please keep Maxine and her household in your prayers.
Very well, amen. All right, so if you want a book, shoot us an email with your shipping information, and we'll mail it out to you. We are now basically at the end of the show. Let me see if we got that's kind of the special. Thanks. We got a couple of things, of course. If you haven't already, you should believe in the subscribe button and bless the like button. And if you want to join us live, you definitely need to ring that bell so you get an update as soon as we drop a live video. You can join us live, and then of course from there, if you are a supporter, if you pay either through our website or through the Patreon, at any capacity, we have the after parties that we do after the show in the Discord for all of the supporters at any capacity, any level. You get to chill out, hang out with us, ask us any questions. Very lion den kind of stuff. Like we sit there and we can talk about the show, to talk about the subject. We're going to sit completely in awkward silence, whatever you guys want to do. And we do that immediately after the show. If you want to become a member, or if you just feel led to help donate to the ministry in any capacity, we are a 501c3 organization, and you can either give monthly or yearly or one-time donations online at alternatemedia.com, ALTARNATE media.com. And thank you all, everybody, whether you're free, you hit the subscribe and the like button, and that's how you support us, which is the freest and easiest way to support us. We thank all of you guys for all of your continued support. We literally couldn't do this without you. And we got a couple of good things coming in the works. So, if you want access to that exclusive content, or we even got a book coming out hopefully pretty soon here.
Yes.
We got a couple of books hoping to be coming out pretty soon, but we got one that's like really soon. So keep an eye out for that book drop.
Absolutely. Other than that, I was just responding to a couple of the comments, but other than that, be looking for next week. We'll be doing the 4th installment of Deck the Halls with Dogmatism, going over the origins of the belief that Christmas has pagan origin. Because one of the other false statements that's circulating around is that this is a new theory. It's so not really a statement. That's more so it's spoken about as though it's new. But some have even made the statement that it was started by Alexander Hislop. That is not true. And we'll go over some of the historical facts from primary sources that would suggest that this is actually a very old belief. In fact, almost as old as the celebration of Christmas itself.
Yeah, so I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. We'll see you guys in the Discord. If you are, whether you're supporting or not, you should be in the Discord. But for the supporters, we'll see you guys in the Discord post show. Thanks guys for joining us once again here on I guess we're just gonna call this the Altered Podcast? Is that what we're gonna do?
I don't know. We haven't had an official meeting about that yet.
I don't know, because we have a Killing the Church series, right? And then whatever. Anyway, thanks for joining us here at Alternate Media on the Alternate Media Podcast, soon to be probably renamed, maybe, possibly, who knows? Standby. And so for me, it's almost about to be the fourth night, but for everybody else watching who isn't on the West Coast, it's probably the fourth night of Hanukkah for you. So with that, I hope you guys have a wonderful night. Chag Sameach Hanukkah. Happy fourth night of Hanukkah, and
L'chaim.